Javier Leiva, let me tell you a story. So this is back in 2018, maybe 2017. I'm on a run, and I looked for a new podcast, and I found the Pretend podcast. And I am going up the hill and listening to this podcast, and it was about cults, a cult in North Carolina. And I just stopped in my tracks. I was like, what is happening? It was next level storytelling. And so I had to stop and figure out who the heck this guy Javier was, because I got the sense that he was local from whatever content was in the podcast. I looked him up and found that he worked at Red Hat, and that he had an Instagram account, connected with him on Instagram, and then we've been friends ever since. Now, that episode about cults, he did not have the cult leader on that show, but fast forward 2 years, 3 years later, he got the freaking cult leader to be a guest on his podcast and went to the cult in Western North Carolina and was like escorted into this compound to interview Jane Whaley, the head of this cult in North Carolina. No joke. So the point is, Javier Leiva, your speaker today, knows how to find guests, knows how to research guests, and I'm going to give the floor to him. Welcome, Javier Leiva.
Thank you, thank you. Awesome. Well, that's a hell of an introduction. That's pretty cool. So how many of you have watched the movie Catch Me If You Can? Oh, that's a lot of you. How many of you have heard of Catch Me If You Can? Like, most of you, right? How many of you actually believe that Catch Me If You Can is based on a true story? I did too. So for those of you who haven't watched Catch Me If You Can, Leonardo DiCaprio plays Frank Abagnale. This is the real guy right here, Frank Abagnale. He's a dashing con artist, and he's being chased by Tom Hanks, who plays the FBI agent. Okay, so in the movie, Abagnale claims that when he was a teenager from 18 to 21, he posed as a pilot, a doctor, a lawyer, a professor, all while playing this game of cat and mouse with the FBI. And this is what he said not only in the movie, but he actually wrote an autobiography that detailed all these crazy adventures, okay? So this is Frank Abagnale dressed like a pilot, a doctor, lawyer, professor, right? Riveting story, amazing story. He also said that he wrote $2.5 million in bad checks, okay? Like just forged checks, $2.5 million. Like this is like the late 70s, early 80s. That's a lot of money, right? He's been on the Today Show with Tom Brokaw. He's been on the Johnny Carson show. He's been on 60 Minutes telling his story. He has become like American folklore, right? We all believe that Frank Abagnale said that he did the things he says he did, right? So I wanted to have Frank Abagnale on my show because I have a show about con artists, and he is like, I mean, come on, name a con artist better and badder than Frank Abagnale. There is none. He was like the top of my bucket list, okay? So I wrote him an email, and I asked him to come on the show. And he said, his people said, well, sorry, Mr. Leiva, Mr. Abagnale no longer does interviews talking about his past. So that was kind of a bummer because like this is like my dream guest. So kind of got a little butthurt, you know, and started doing my own research. And it turns out Frank Abagnale's story is mostly a lie. He made up most of it. At least 90% of it is a lie. And the more I started digging, I found Alan Logan's book. Now, Alan Logan, he's an author. He self-published on Amazon this book, and it was kind of like an expose on Frank Abagnale. But I didn't want to believe it because to me, finding out that Frank Abagnale wasn't who he said he was like telling me that there's kids that Santa Claus wasn't real. I wasn't thinking about that when I read. But anyways, it was like a big shocker to me, and I didn't want to believe it. And I talked to Alan Logan, and he's like, "Hey, listen, if you don't believe me, why don't you recreate my research? Do everything that I did to figure this stuff out. It's all publicly available information." And so I took him up on that challenge, and I started researching Abagnale. And by the way, my name is Javier Leiva. For those of you who don't know, my podcast is Pretend, and I interview con artists, okay? It's all about deception, people pretending to be someone who they're not. And today, what I'm going to show you guys is the same techniques that I used to research Abagnale and my other guests. I'm going to show you those same techniques because you might not hunt down con artists and criminals, but you create content, you have guests on your shows, and sometimes you hit a wall and you can't get through to the guests. And I'm going to show you the most extreme ways to research your guests and to find your guests. So let's get back to the main topic here. What we're going to talk about today is OSINT. Has anybody ever heard this term, OSINT? Okay, OSINT sounds very technical, but it stands for Open Source Intelligence. And it's just a fancy way of saying that investigators, like myself, I'm a journalist, but it could be law enforcement, or it could be a fraud investigator, or it could be you. You could go on publicly available databases to find whatever you're looking for. So it could be Google, it could be a newspaper, it could be social media, it could be historical records or court documents. All these things are available to us, and they're tools that you could use to locate your next guest, or even just do background research on your guest. You know, I've listened to a lot of podcasts or YouTube videos where they have like a guest. In fact, I saw one the other day of this guy making a lot of claims. You know, as content creators, it's your responsibility to do a little legwork and make sure that the people that you have on your show are who they say they are. So, as content creators, we got to be like the squirrel to the nut, okay? Never take no for an answer. Don't stop just because you hit a wall, okay? We all hit walls when we're doing research. But what we're about to show you, OSINT is not magic. It doesn't work 100% of the time. It's the little clues, the little breadcrumbs that when you put them together, tell a bigger story, okay? So there's a lot of trial and error in this process. And that's the squirrel finding the nut. All right, so let's get back to Frank Abagnale. So Alan Logan challenged me. He said, try to recreate my research, and I did. I pulled military records, court documents, penitentiary files, marriage certificates, divorce decrees, you name it, news articles, mug shots. I found everything on this guy. But this was the smoking gun, okay? This little yellow card, okay, might not seem like a big deal, but if Frank Abagnale claims that he was a doctor, posed as a doctor, lawyer, pilot, professor from the age of 16 to 21, then this card, the dates on this card show that he was actually in prison most of that time. So it's impossible for him to have done the things that he claimed he did. I even found checks where he did write bad checks, so that part is true, right? Every lie, by the way, stems from some truth, right? So he did write some bad checks, but look at this guy. He would write bad checks using his own name. Yeah, like real brilliant con artist there, right? And he didn't steal $2.5 million. Court records show that he only stole about $1,500, okay? That's a big difference. So he said no to coming on my show, and I don't take no for an answer, so I found out that he was going to be in Vegas at the MGM doing this big presentation. So I met him in the hallway outside of his presentation and surprised him, and I said, hey, Mr. Abagnale, how is it that you were posing as a pilot, doctor, lawyer, professor, if you were sitting in prison the entire time? And he's like, and no, you got the wrong dates and this and that. And I go, actually, no, I got your prison record right here. And he's like, and that's when everybody around them they thought it was a friendly interview, and slowly they started realizing, we got to get this guy out of here. So this conversation, you can find it on YouTube. It only lasted a couple minutes, but it was great. Never take no for an answer. If your guest says no, go find them.
Well, I guess you called him because you could.
Yes. I actually called my series The Real Catch Me If You Can because the whole premise of the movie is that the FBI was hunting him down. The FBI was never hunting him down. Okay, the actual arrest, the FBI did arrest him. That arrest took about an hour. Okay, the FBI office in Atlanta got a call from the FBI office in New York, and they say, hey, can you pick up this con artist at this motel? And they're like, yeah, cool. They drove to the motel, they knocked on the door, they slapped handcuffs, and the rest is history. I actually talk about like finding guests. I found the FBI agent who arrested Frank Abagnale. Let me just tell you how deep this mythology is, that even the guy who arrested him, who knows that he was not pursuing him for years and years and years, actually believes the myth. He actually believes that Frank Abagnale did all this stuff. It's delusional. Don't get me started. But anyways, as a result from my investigation and from Alan Logan's book, AARP dropped him as a spokesperson. Google added a disclaimer to his famous Google Talks at Google video where he talks about all these crazy adventures that he never did. So now when people go watch that video, there's a disclaimer that says that it's not true. Oh, wait, hold on. And also, this is a funny story I didn't include in the presentation. He was booked to be the keynote speaker at some event in Ohio. The event organizers then listened to my podcast. And they're like, whoa, this guy's not for real. We just hired a con man, you know? Very meta, right? Like, he is a con man, but not the con man you think he is. So they're like, why don't we invite Javier to speak after him, just to like balance things out. When Frank Abagnale found out I was coming, all of a sudden he had a scheduling conflict. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, so I took his keynote spot, by the way. So, all right, enough about Abagnale, because we really did like 13 episodes on him. Let's talk about public records, and I'll get to her in a second. Public records is actually where I spend the majority of my time. That's where I get most of my information, because it's a treasure trove, okay? So if I'm looking for a guest, and I'm looking for information about that guest, you have to do a lot of legwork. You know, submit a Freedom of Information request with the sheriff's office, with the police department, with the courts, and it takes time. Sometimes some cities like Maricopa County in Arizona, they're really great. You just type in the case number, boom, you got the file. But some little podunk, like county in the middle of nowhere, they don't even know what to do when you ask for a request. So it's a process, right? But this is actually my latest episode of the podcast. This is Lisa Landon, okay? Lisa, and this is her mugshot, by the way. What a great mugshot. Lisa Landon is a woman who was arrested multiple times, but she had a very clever idea. She's like, why don't I hack into the court system and pose as a prosecutor and drop all my charges? She actually did this successfully, dropped all her charges. She actually posed as a judge, issued herself a refund and everything, worked out custody issues. Brilliant, brilliant woman, right? But I wanted to know more about Lisa. I wanted Lisa on my show. Well, it turns out she's either in jail or very hard to reach. And I really, really wanted to do the story. So now I got to do the legwork. So I called the county where she was tried, and I got some court records. So now we're getting some clues, okay? So I want to walk you through this process. We have an address. We have a victim. They call the victim JD. They didn't give me a name, okay? So how am I supposed to find this guy? Or girl, whatever. So I plug in all the addresses that I have for Lisa Landon. I do a Google search. And I start looking at the people that live around that address, people that are associated with her. And I come across these names right here, JD. Could that be JD? I don't know. So I pull up JD's information. I call JD. Bingo. That was JD. That was her victim. JD told me that Lisa Landon not only stole his brand new truck, she would sneak into his apartment and just hang out while he was at work. And one day he walked in on her and spotted her. That's when she got arrested, okay? And she had this really foul odor, like a really bad BO. And he started thinking, he's like, I used to walk into my apartment and smell that same smell. She must have been there countless times, okay? But I could have never gotten that guest if I wouldn't have done the legwork. And you see how when I tell you that it's not perfect, you have to really connect dots. So where should you start? You should always start with Google, because Google is amazing, right? But don't just Google anything. Like if you're looking for me, Javier Leiva, I would put that in quotes, because otherwise if you just search Javier Leiva, you're going to get Javier Rodriguez, Francisco Leiva, I don't know, you're going to get a lot of different results. So in closing it with quotes, gives you a more specific result. You start seeing that pretend, podcast, Frank Abagnale. So we're getting close, right? But we need to do more of an advanced search. I put my name in quotes, but I don't want to know about Frank Abagnale, so I put the minus sign, Frank Abagnale. I put the minus sign podcast because I really want to just find out where Javier lives, okay? I don't want to know about his podcast. I don't want to know about his true crime stuff. I have a hunch that he lives in Apex, so I put Apex in quotes. And look, a public record comes out. Now, it has an old address, but they got close, right? Let's talk about the other ways of searching for things. So a lot of times as you're looking for I call them targets, you call them guests, whatever, and you come across a page that 404s. The page was taken down for whatever reason, right? Don't give up. There are internet archive sites. There's Google Cache, okay? So you could plug in that URL and maybe at several moments in time, there are images of what that website used to look like. So that's a treasure trove right there. I'll give you an example. People who delete their tweets, there's many ways to recover, or X's or whatever. People who delete their tweets, you can recover them through archiving, right? So this person goes, I'm going to delete all my tweets, start it over, and look, found you, sucker. So what about social media? Social medias, that's another treasure trove because social media is an interesting place because we post so much about ourselves, where we are, where we visit, or who we hang out with, who our family members are and our friends. I mean, there's so much that an investigator or someone like yourself that's looking for a guest, we post a lot of stuff. So if I'm looking for, I don't know, Stacy, and I can't get a hold of her, now I could get a hold of her friends or somebody to get to Stacy. But a lot of people are wising up to this and they're locking down their accounts, which I recommend that you all do that so that you're not so easily accessible. But when you lock down your account, it gets really hard to penetrate that layer. I've been known to create dummy sock puppet accounts, and that's another technique that I use. So social media is awesome. Okay, but then there's other things. We like to date, so you could search dating websites. There's genealogy websites. Jarrett is not here tonight, but there's somebody in our group that does forensic genealogy. There's a lot of information that you could get that way. Jerry just did a podcast episode about how they caught the Golden State Killer with genealogy data. There's online forums like Reddit, Craigslist, and this is, guys, we're just scratching the surface today, okay? There are so many ways that you can find people. So this is a very powerful tool and a very frightening tool. So everything I'm telling you today, just imagine I'm showing you how to find people, but you could also reverse engineer this, and this is how you should protect your own personal information, because there's a lot of information out there, guys. So this is Spokio. This is a people search website, and people search websites are databases that I don't know how they broker this data, but it's out there. If you search for most people, they'll show up here. You're not going to find me on these things, okay? I search for Javier Leiva. You're not going to find me because I've scrubbed these databases and removed my name, and I recommend that you do the same. You could hire a company that does it for you like that, or you could just take the time to opt out of all these websites. But yeah, you could find a lot of people. These are some: Spokio, True People Search, Fast People Search. There's a lot of them. But then, so you find somebody on one of these people search websites, and they're going to give you a lot of information. So they give you possible associates. They give you past addresses, past phone, like a bunch of phone numbers, email addresses. But what do you make up with all that information? Like, if somebody has like a AOL.com email, it's probably old. So how do you know which email is the right email, right? So you plug it into one of these email verification websites, and they give you a report of first seen, last seen. So you could try to see how active this email is before you reach out to somebody, okay? All right, so if there's one website that I want you to check tonight, is this one. Okay, and it's called Have I Been Pawned? And the answer is yes, you have been pawned. So what does that mean? You plug in your email address there, and it tells you how many data breaches your email has been involved in, okay? And if you think you haven't, like, who's shopped at Target? Okay, well, if you have a Target account, chances are you've been pawned, okay? And what does that mean? That means that your username, password, your full name, that could be out there in the dark web, okay? So how do you know, how do you find people's username and passwords? You can. There's a website called dhash.com. I wouldn't go there unless you have to. But I could get people's passwords. There's sometimes complete passwords, incomplete passwords. All this information's out there, guys, okay? So I couldn't find Javier on a people search website because he scrubbed the databases, right? But guess what? I own a house, okay? And I own a car. And so if you're trying to find somebody, it's a great tool. But remember, we're looking at it, how do I protect myself, right? The only way to get yourself off of these databases is to transfer your home to a trust, your vehicle to an LLC. Just get it off your name so that these tax assessors websites don't find you. But how many of you own a pet? How many of you have a dog or a cat? Really? That's it? Come on. Okay, a lot of people have dogs or cats. Did you know that when you take Fido to the vet and you give the vet your information, the vet turns around and sends that information to the county. And now all I have to do is press that button and I know all about your dog and I know where you live. Isn't that crazy? Is that crazy?
Even without having an animal control encounter or anything, as long as you went to the vet.
Yeah, the point is, if your dog bites me, I need to know who you are. So
And maybe flew the scene or something, you can find those records.
yeah, so what I would recommend is just give them a bad address. Give your vet a fake address. Why does your vet need to know your address? Yeah. Seriously, we are too trusting. We give out way more information that's needed, okay? Never give out your social unless you really have to. So images. Somebody, this is here, okay? Somebody texted me this image of one of our meetups. Pretty innocent, right? But as an investigator, that image is a gold mine. Because if you don't have your settings correctly on your phone, I could not only find out what phone, iPhone 13, the lens, all that stuff, and what date, but guess what? I know where you were when you took that picture, okay? So if you send somebody a picture, if somebody sends you a picture, you just extract the metadata, and boom, you know where your target is. All right, so let's talk about the Stalker series that I worked on, okay? So this is the Fernandez family. They're out of Arizona, salt of the earth, right? Husband, postal worker, mom is a stay-at-home mom. She's taking care of 2 disabled kids. There's 5 kids total, okay? They contacted me because they said that they were the victims of a cyber stalker, okay? And they had a suspicion that they knew who the cyber stalker was. It was their daughter's doctor's husband. Their daughter's doctor's husband was stalking them. Why? I have no idea, right? But he's sending all these messages, creating all these Instagram profiles. At first it started out friendly, but then they started turning kind of harassing. All of a sudden, Rick, who's the postal worker, is getting pictures of him on his route. There's pictures outside of their house. There's pizzas being delivered to their house. The SWAT team, the police, show up in the middle of the night. So it got pretty crazy. But as it turns out, that I was talking to these people for 2 years, and all those Instagram accounts, you could change your profile name all day long, but your user ID never changes, okay? And the police subpoenaed Instagram and got the IP addresses where those Instagram messages were originating from. Guess what? They were coming from their own house. They were stalking themselves. But who was stalking? Who was actually pressing send? It was one of these guys. Somebody, except it would be a shocker if it was the 9-year-old boy. But there's one person missing from the shot, and he's in the reflection right there. That's their oldest son. Somebody in that house was sending the messages. Was it the mom? Was it the dad? Was it the kids? Because the kids had motive. They had motives for tormenting their parents. So now as an investigator, we have to figure this out, right? Because actually after my series, I did 12 episodes on this case. Right before I released the 12 episodes, I sent them to the Phoenix PD detective working on this case. A few days later, a grand jury met, and both Rick and Tanya were charged with 6 felonies combined. So that was the result of my investigation. But, you know, I teamed up with a white hat ethical hacker. Okay, this is a guy who goes into the dark web and starts pulling information. I tried to blur out some of the sensitive stuff, but basically what we did was the equivalent of like what you see in those FBI shows, like the, you know, like the suspect board, and we put all the suspects, all the characters, we got their names, their phone numbers, their IP addresses, their email address, everything we knew about them, we plotted on this mind map. But this is the kind of research that we're doing, because as a investigative journalist, I want to know who's pressing send. And it turns out, I mean, I still don't know who was pressing send, but we have to like get as much information as possible. Our ethical hacker was able to find some passwords and some usernames for all of them and started logging into their Gmail account. When you log into your Gmail, it tells you that it wants to verify with another device, right? She had 5 devices that she never told police and she never told me about. So we have to connect those dots, right? And you got to drill in and drill in and drill in. So this is how I'm using open source intelligence to produce my show. Hopefully you got some tips that are applicable to what you do and how you find your guests. But there's a lot of tricks out there, okay? And we seriously just scratched the surface. My favorite books on this topic, 2 of them are from Michael Basil. He's a friend of mine. He's probably the authority on OSINT. He's a former law enforcement, and he worked at the FBI. He actually was a consultant on Mr. Robot, the show Mr. Robot. And this guy, I don't know what he looks like. I don't know where he is. I only speak to him through encrypted channels. I mean, he's hardcore. But we did an investigation together where we went into the dark web and we found a bunch of breached databases. So what happens is, let's say, in this case, it was a car dealership. Ransomware attacks, these hackers send ransomware to the car dealership. They're like, hey, we got your data. And if you want your data back, you're going to have to pay us. Well, what happens is that the car insurance dealership doesn't pay them. And so what the hackers do is they dump all that data on the dark web. It's just a big data dump. And now all of that data is publicly available information. It is legal for us to access that information. And so I pulled up people's credit reports, like people trying to buy cars. I got their social security, their bank account number, their like credit history. Like, it was crazy. And I called the guy and I said, hey, you know, I'm doing this story. I'm a journalist. Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions? And I said, is your social security XYZ? And he said, yep. Is your date of birth this? Yep. And I'm like, dude, your information's out there. And so the reason why this is important is because as content creators, we have a lot of tools at our disposal. As individuals, there's a lot of your information out there, and you need to know what's out there in order to protect yourself. This is not to scare you, it's just so you can be smarter, right? Something I tell people all the time, and this is just use a password manager, freeze your credit. You know, like those are 2 things that you could do to protect yourself, okay, from bad guys. Because remember, I'm using this information as an investigative tool, but a bad actor could use this information to completely financially destroy you, okay? Or worse, right? And so another resource that Michelle Kahn, who's the white hat that I worked with, he's a great resource on this too. So if you're interested, I could point you in the right direction. But yeah, that's how to find people the most extreme way possible. So thank you very much.